Hello, my dear adventurers. Welcome back to another evening of shared stories and dreams where we explore the paths not taken and the endings that might break our hearts. Tonight, we're diving into something that honestly keeps me up at night, a theory that feels both inevitable and unbearable at the same time. We're exploring what would happen if Eleven doesn't make it out of Season 5 alive. Now, I know that's heavy, really heavy, but stick with me because there's so much to unpack here about loss, sacrifice growing up, and what it truly means to be a hero. Before we get too deep into the emotional devastation ahead, if you enjoy these deep dives into Stranger Things and want to support the channel, please hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Your support means the world and helps me keep creating these videos for you to drift off to. But for now, grab your blanket, get comfortable, and let's explore this heartbreaking possibility together. So let's start with why this theory even exists in the first place. Eleven's death in Season 5 has become one of the most popular and widely discussed predictions in the entire Stranger Things fandom. And honestly, when you look at the evidence, when you consider the narrative structure, the themes, the interviews, the set photos, it all starts to paint a picture that's equal parts beautiful and tragic. The idea that the girl who opened the first gate might need to be the one to close it forever, that's powerful storytelling. That's the kind of ending that stays with you long after the credits roll. The theory really gained momentum after Season 4 ended with Hawkins torn apart, the upside down bleeding into our reality, and Max in a coma with Eleven, desperately trying to keep her consciousness alive somewhere in the void. We saw Eleven push herself to her absolute limits, using powers that seemed to drain the very life from her, and that visual of her straining, bleeding, fighting to save someone she loves, that felt like foreshadowing. It felt like the show telling us that Eleven's greatest battle won't just cost her powers, it'll cost her everything. What makes this theory so compelling is how much narrative sense it makes. Stranger Things has always been about sacrifice. Bob Newby gave his life to save Joyce and the kids. Billy Hargrove died protecting Max and Eleven from the Mind Flayer. Eddie Munson sacrificed himself to buy the others' time. Hopper was willing to die in that Russian facility. The show has consistently shown us that heroes are defined not by their powers or their victories, but by what they're willing to give up for the people they love. And Eleven, who has the most power of anyone, who has saved Hawkins again and again, she seems destined to make the ultimate sacrifice. But let's talk about the evidence, the actual concrete things that make fans believe this is where the story is heading. First, there are the set photos and leaks that emerged during Season 5's production. Multiple sources captured images of what appears to be Hopper and Mike having an intensely emotional scene, possibly near a memorial of some kind. The body language, the tears, the way they're holding each other, it doesn't look like a conversation about a near miss. It looks like grief. It looks like loss. And given that Hopper and Mike's primary connection in the show is Eleven, the daughter Hopper adopted and the girl Mike loves, it's not hard to connect those dots. Then there's Millie Bobby Brown herself. The actress has been incredibly emotional in recent interviews about saying goodbye to Eleven and to Stranger Things. In one interview with Variety, She revealed that she cried more than expected on her final day of filming, saying that while she was ready personally and professionally for the show to end, the finality hit her harder than she anticipated. She described it as feeling like a massive milestone, but also carrying the heavy weight of knowing it was truly over. That kind of language, that emphasis on finality and weight, it suggests something more than just wrapping up a successful TV series. It suggests an ending that's permanent, devastating, and meaningful. David Harbour, who plays Hopper, has also been cryptic in his comments. He told Entertainment Tonight that he recently shot some of the most moving material of the entire series, scenes that were deeply emotional. While he didn't give details, the fact that he singled out specific scenes as the most moving suggests major character moments, potentially including the loss of someone he cares deeply about. And who does Hopper care about most? His adopted daughter, 11. The thought of Hopper losing another daughter after Sarah, after finally building a family again, that's the kind of emotional devastation that would produce the kind of scenes Harbour described. The Duffer Brothers themselves have been dropping hints that Season 5 will be the darkest season yet. They've called it violent, emotionally brutal, and satisfying in a way that suggests real consequences. In multiple interviews, they've emphasized that not everyone will survive, that the stakes are higher than ever, and that they want the ending to feel earned. They've also said they struggle with killing main characters because it makes the show depressing and takes focus away from the victory over Vecna. But notice they didn't say they won't kill anyone, just that they struggle with it. That suggests they know they need to do it. They just want to make sure it serves the story. What's really interesting is that the Duffer Brothers have known the final scene of Stranger Things since they were working on Season 2. They've said it's locked in, that they've been building toward it for years. If that final scene involves Eleven's death or absence, then everything we've watched, every moment of her journey, has been leading to this one devastating conclusion. That kind of long-term planning suggests they're not just throwing in a shocking death for impact. They're crafting a tragedy that's been foreshadowed from the beginning. Let's also talk about Millie Bobby Brown's career trajectory. She's become a massive star beyond Stranger Things, starring in the Enola Holmes films, producing her own projects, building a beauty empire. She's made it clear in interviews that she's ready to move on, ready to close this chapter and explore new opportunities. From a practical standpoint, killing off 11 ensures there's no possibility of Millie being obligated to return for spin-offs, reunion specials, or any future Stranger Things projects. It gives her the clean break she seems to want, while also providing a definitive ending to the character that made her famous. Fan theories on Reddit and other platforms have dissected every frame of the Season 5 trailer, every interview, every behind-the-scenes photo, and the consensus is increasingly leaning toward 11 not surviving. One popular theory suggests that 11 will need to sacrifice herself to permanently seal the gates between the Upside Down and our reality. Since she opened the first gate, since her connection to Henry Creel and Vecna is so fundamental to everything that's happened, it makes thematic sense that she would be the one to end it, even at the cost of her own life. Another theory proposes that 11 might not die in the traditional sense, but could become trapped in the Upside Down, forced to remain there as a kind of guardian. or seal, preventing Vecna and the Mind Flayer from ever breaking through again. This would be a living death, a sacrifice that's arguably even more tragic than dying, because she'd be conscious, aware, alone in that hellish dimension for eternity, while Mike and her friends and family move on with their lives. It's the kind of bittersweet ending the Duffer Brothers might choose, one that's both hopeful and absolutely heartbreaking. Now let's really dig into Eleven's journey across the seasons, because understanding where she's been helps us understand why this ending would be so powerful. Eleven started as a scared, traumatized child with a shaved head and limited vocabulary, having spent her entire life as a lab experiment. Dr. Brenner treated her like a weapon, forced her to use her powers to spy on Russians, to kill, to do things that no child should ever have to do. When she escaped and Mike and the boys found her, it was the first time in her life that people treated her with kindness, with friendship, with love. In Season 1, Eleven was driven primarily by survival instinct and a desperate need for connection. She bonded with Mike because he was the first person to show her genuine care. She learned what friendship meant through Dustin and Lucas. She discovered what it felt like to be wanted and valued for who she was, not what she could do. And when it came time to face the Demogorgon, when she opened that gate and then had to close it by sending the creature back and disappearing herself, that was her first act of true sacrifice. She didn't know if she'd survive, but she did it anyway to save her friends. Season 2 showed us Eleven living in hiding with Hopper, learning to be a normal girl while also grappling with her powers and her past. Her journey to find her mother and then to meet Kaylee, also known as 8, was about discovering her identity beyond the lab. Kaylee offered her a path of vengeance, of using her powers to punish those who'd hurt them. But Eleven ultimately chose to return to Hawkins, to her friends, because she understood that family isn't about blood or shared trauma. It's about the people who love you and whom you love in return. The season ended with Eleven closing the gate to the Upside Down, a massive expenditure of power that pushed her to her limits but saved Hawkins. In Season 3, Eleven was at her peak, in a relationship with Mike, bonded with Max, and fully integrated into the group as both a friend and a protector. But the battle with the Mind Flayer cost her everything. She lost her powers when she was injured, when that piece of the Mind Flayer infected her and she had to have it painfully removed. For the first time since she was a child, Eleven was powerless, just a normal girl. And then Hopper apparently died, and she lost the father figure who'd given her a home, a name, a life. The end of Season 3 showed us an Eleven who was grieving, powerless, and uncertain about who she was without her abilities. Season 4 was all about Eleven reclaiming herself. The Nina Project forced her to relive her most traumatic memories, to confront what happened in the Rainbow Room when she supposedly killed all the other children. Discovering that it was actually Henry Creel, that she didn't massacre her fellow test subjects, but instead fought back against the true monster, that gave her the emotional strength to access her powers again. And when she did, when she regained her abilities, she came back stronger than ever. The final battle saw her fighting Vecna from across the country, remotely supporting Max, using her powers in ways we'd never seen before. But here's the thing, each season has shown Eleven using more and more of herself, draining her reserves, pushing beyond what seems safe or sustainable. In Season 1, using her powers too much made her nose bleed and left her exhausted. By Season 4, we're seeing her scream in agony, her body shaken with the effort, blood pouring from her nose and sometimes her eyes. It feels like the show is telling us that there's a limit, that eventually the powers will demand too much and her body won't be able to sustain it. So when we imagine Season 5, when we think about the final battle with Vecna and the permanent sealing of the Upside Down, it's not hard to envision Eleven pouring everything she has into one last massive effort. We can picture her reaching deep, deeper than she's ever gone before, using every ounce of power to tear Vecna apart and slam the gates shut forever. And we can imagine that effort being too much, her body giving out, her life force completely spent in the service of saving everyone and everything she loves. The emotional weight of Eleven's potential death isn't just about losing a beloved character. It's about what her death would mean for everyone else, how it would shatter the people who love her, and how they'd have to find a way to live with that loss. Let's start with Mike, because Mike and Eleven's relationship has been the emotional core of Stranger Things since the very first season. Mike fell in love with Eleven almost immediately. She was this mysterious, powerful girl who ate his frozen waffles and communicated in single-word sentences. And Mike, who was grieving the loss of Will and feeling powerless to help, found purpose in protecting her. Their relationship has evolved from that initial connection into genuine, deep love. By Season 4, we saw Mike finally able to say the words, "I love you," to tell Eleven that she's extraordinary, that she gave him the courage to be brave. If Eleven dies, Mike would be absolutely devastated. We're talking about a loss that would fundamentally change who he is. Mike's entire identity has been wrapped up in being Eleven's boyfriend, in being the person who protects her and supports her and believes in her when she doesn't believe in herself. Without her, Mike would have to figure out who he is on his own. And that's not a quick or easy process. That's years of grief, of processing, of slowly learning to remember her with love instead of just pain. The set photos showing Mike and Hopper in an emotional scene make so much sense when you consider this scenario. Hopper would be the only other person who truly understands the depth of that loss. He lost a daughter once before with Sarah. He knows what it's like to watch someone you love slip away. And Mike, who's just a teenager, who's never experienced loss on this scale, he'd need someone who gets it. That scene, if it is indeed about Eleven's death, would be about two people who loved her trying to find comfort in shared grief. It would be about Hopper telling Mike that it's okay to be broken, that it's okay to not be okay, and that eventually, with time, the pain becomes something you can carry. Finn Wolfhard, who plays Mike, has talked about how emotional the final episodes are, how the cast was crying during the table read. If Mike loses Eleven, if he has to watch her die or deal with the aftermath of her death, those would absolutely be scenes that would reduce everyone to tears. Mike's journey has always been about protecting the people he loves. To fail in that ultimate way, to lose Eleven despite everything they've been through that would break him in ways we've never seen. Then there's Hopper, and honestly, this might be the most devastating aspect of Eleven's death. Hopper has already lost one daughter. Sarah died of cancer when she was young, and that loss destroyed Hopper's life. His marriage fell apart. He spiraled into addiction and depression. He became a shadow of himself, just going through the motions in Hawkins, not really living anymore. And then 11 came into his life, and gradually, painfully, he learned to be a father again. He took her in, protected her, taught her about the world, loved her fiercely even when they fought. By season 4, Hopper had fully embraced his role as 11's dad. He'd gone through hell in that Russian prison thinking about her, desperate to get back to her. When they finally reunited, the emotion was overwhelming. Hopper had his daughter back. He had his reason for living back. The thought of him having to bury another daughter, having to stand at another funeral and say goodbye to another child, that's almost too cruel to contemplate. David Harbour's comments about filming the most moving scenes of the series take on a whole new weight when you consider this possibility. Of course, those scenes would be moving. They'd be Hopper experiencing his worst nightmare all over again. The difference this time is that he'd have Joyce and the kids. He'd have a support system that he didn't have when Sarah died. But that doesn't make the loss any less agonizing. It just means he wouldn't have to go through it alone. If there's one mercy in this scenario, it's that Hopper would understand, on some level, why 11 did what she did. Hopper knows sacrifice. He was willing to die to close the gate in season 3. He knows that sometimes heroes have to make impossible choices. He'd be proud of her even as his heart shattered. And that mixture of pride and grief, of honoring her sacrifice while mourning the life she'll never get to live, that's the kind of complex emotion that makes for powerful storytelling. Joyce Byers would also be affected deeply by 11's death. Joyce has always had a maternal instinct toward all the kids, not just her own sons. She welcomed 11 into their family without hesitation. When they moved to California, 11 came with them as part of the Byers household. Joyce sees 11 as another daughter, and she'd grieve her as such. The difference is that Joyce would probably focus her grief on taking care of others, on making sure Hopper doesn't spiral, on being there for Mike and the kids. That's who Joyce is. She processes her own pain by helping others through theirs. But let's not forget Will, because Will's connection to 11 is unique and important. Will has been connected to the Upside Down since season 1. He was possessed by the Mind Flayer in season 2. He still senses when the Upside Down is active. In many ways, Will and 11 are the two people most fundamentally affected by and connected to the supernatural events in Hawkins. They understand each other in ways that others can't. If 11 dies, Will would feel that loss not just as a friend mourning a friend, but as someone who knows on a deep level what she was fighting and what it cost her. There's also Will's complicated feelings about Mike to consider. Season 4 confirmed that Will has romantic feelings for Mike, feelings he knows can never be reciprocated. If 11 dies, Will would have to watch the person he loves grieving the person he loved. That's a special kind of painful. Will would probably bury his own feelings even deeper, focusing on being a good friend to Mike, supporting him through the grief. But inside, Will would be dealing with the complexity of mourning 11 while also grappling with what her absence means for his relationship with Mike. Noah Schnapp has said that season 5 brings Will's story full circle. that it addresses everything that's been building since season 1. If part of that involves Will learning to let go of his feelings for Mike, learning to find his own identity and purpose beyond his unrequited love, then Eleven's death could be a catalyst for that growth. It would force Will to step up, to be the strong one, to figure out who he is when he's not trying to keep his feelings hidden. Max's fate is another huge question mark hanging over season 5, and it's deeply connected to 11. Max is in a coma, her body broken from Vecna's attack. 11 is somehow keeping Max's consciousness alive, reaching into the void trying to find her. It's unclear if Max can be fully healed or if she's permanently damaged. But one thing seems certain: 11 is the key to Max's recovery. If 11 dies before she can bring Max back, what happens to Max? Does her consciousness disappear? Does she remain in that coma forever? Or does she wake up but with significant disabilities or trauma? This creates an impossible dilemma. Maybe 11 is faced with a choice: save Max or save everyone else. Use her remaining strength to bring Max back and risk not having enough power left to defeat Vecna, or defeat Vecna and let Max go. That's the kind of Sophie's choice that would destroy 11 emotionally. She loves Max. They became close friends in season 3. The thought of abandoning her, of letting her drift away in the void, that would be unbearable, but so would letting Vecna win and destroy everything. If 11 chooses to save everyone at the cost of Max, if Max dies in that coma because 11's energy was spent elsewhere, the surviving characters would have to deal with that guilt and grief on top of losing 11. Lucas especially would be devastated. He already watched Max die once, watched her bones snap and her eyes go white. To have her die again, permanently this time, while he's helpless to stop it, that would break him. And knowing that 11 had to make an impossible choice, that might provide some comfort, but it doesn't erase the pain. Alternatively, maybe 11 does bring Max back. Maybe one of her last acts is pouring enough power into Max to wake her up, to give her friend another chance at life. And then, depleted, 11 faces Vecna and gives everything she has left. In that scenario, Max wakes up to discover that 11 died saving her. That's heavy. That's survivor's guilt on a massive scale. Max would spend the rest of her life knowing that she's alive because 11 sacrificed herself. That's the kind of thing that defines a person, that shapes every choice they make going forward. Sadie Sink has been deliberately vague about Max's fate in season 5, saying she has no idea what's coming and that Max's storyline is very up in the air. That could mean Max dies, or it could mean she survives, but in a very different state than before. Either way, the connection to 11's fate seems undeniable. These two characters are linked now, and whatever happens to one will profoundly affect the other. Dustin, Lucas, and the rest of the party would all be gutted by 11's death. Dustin, who's always been the optimist, the one who keeps everyone's spirits up, he'd have to find a way to process grief that's so much bigger than anything he's experienced. Eddie's death hit him hard, and Eddie was someone he'd only known for a short time. 11 has been part of their group for years. She's saved them repeatedly. She's family. Dustin would probably try to honor her memory by being strong, by taking care of the others, but inside he'd be struggling. Lucas would feel the loss acutely as well, especially if Max doesn't survive or doesn't fully recover. Lucas has always been the pragmatic one, the skeptic who eventually comes around. He'd probably approach Eleven's death analytically at first, trying to understand it, trying to make sense of the sacrifice. But eventually, the grief would break through that logical exterior, and he'd have to actually feel the loss. Lucas and Eleven were never as close as Eleven and Mike, but they were friends, teammates. Her absence would leave a hole in the party that nothing could fill. Erica Sinclair, Lucas's little sister, has become more involved in the supernatural adventures with each season. She's smart, brave, and fiercely loyal. If Eleven dies, Erica would probably deal with it by throwing herself into logic and strategy, by trying to figure out how to honor Eleven's legacy. But she'd also be watching her brother grieve, watching Mike fall apart, and that would affect her. Erica looks up to the older kids. Seeing them broken by loss would force her to confront the real cost of being a hero. Steve Harrington would take Eleven's death hard as well, even though they don't share as much screen time. Steve has evolved into this protective big brother figure for the whole group. He drives them around. He fights monsters with them. He puts his body on the line to keep them safe. If Eleven dies, Steve would feel like he failed in his self-appointed role. He'd wonder if there was something he could have done, some way he could have protected her better. Steve processes emotion through action, so he'd probably throw himself into taking care of the others, into making sure Mike and Hopper have what they need. Robin, Steve's best friend, would support him through his grief while dealing with her own complicated feelings. Robin didn't know Eleven well, but she knows what Eleven meant to the others. Robin's strength is in providing emotional support and perspective. She'd probably be the one reminding Steve that Eleven made her own choice, that she died a hero, and that the best way to honor her is to live well and keep fighting. Robin understands that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone grieving is just be present, not trying to fix it, but just being there. Nancy Wheeler would also be affected, though her connection to Eleven is more distant. Nancy has always been focused on investigating and exposing the truth. If Eleven dies, Nancy would probably channel her grief into documenting what happened, into making sure the world knows what Eleven did and why it mattered. Nancy processes trauma by turning it into action, into purpose. She'd want Eleven's sacrifice to mean something beyond just Hawkins, to be part of a larger truth that needs to be told. Jonathan Byers, who's been somewhat on the periphery of the main action in recent seasons, would feel the loss through his family's grief. Watching his mother mourn another child, watching Will struggle with the loss of someone who understood his connection to the Upside Down, that would be Jonathan's experience of Eleven's death. Jonathan has always been the supportive presence, the one who helps others cope. He'd step into that role again, being there for Joyce and Will while privately dealing with his own sense of loss and helplessness. Argyle, Jonathan's friend from California, might seem like an odd person to mention in the context of Eleven's death, but hear me out. Argyle represents a kind of uncomplicated joy and acceptance that the others often lack. If Eleven dies, Argyle would probably be the one reminding everyone to celebrate her life, not just mourn her death. He'd encourage them to remember the good times, to share stories, to find moments of lightness even in the darkness. Argyle's gift is perspective, the ability to see beyond immediate pain to the larger picture. The others might need that kind of energy to help them heal. So we've talked about the emotional fallout, the ways Eleven's death would devastate the people who love her. But let's shift gears and discuss the practical implications. If Eleven dies, how does the final battle actually play out? Who closes the gates? How do they defeat Vecna without the most powerful person on their side? One popular theory is that Eleven doesn't die at the beginning of the battle, but at the end. She fights alongside the others, uses her powers to weaken Vecna, maybe even delivers the killing blow. But the effort, the sheer amount of power required, it's too much. Her body can't sustain it. She closes the gates, seals the Upside Down, and then, with the victory secured, she collapses. Maybe she has a few final moments to say goodbye, to tell Mike she loves him, to thank Hopper for being her dad. Or maybe she just slips away peacefully, knowing she accomplished what she needed to do. In this scenario, the others would have to grapple with a bittersweet victory. They saved Hawkins, they saved the world, but the cost was 11. That's heavy. That's the kind of ending that stays with you, because it's not a clean, happy conclusion. It's messy and painful and real. Heroes die, sacrifices have consequences, and the people left behind have to figure out how to move forward knowing that their victory came at an unbearable price. Another possibility is that Eleven's death is more directly sacrificial. Maybe to close the gates permanently, someone has to remain on the other side, in the Upside Down, holding them shut. And 11, knowing she's the only one powerful enough to do it, volunteers. She says her goodbyes, she makes her peace, and then she crosses over. The gates seal behind her, and she's trapped in that hellish dimension, alone but keeping everyone safe. This is arguably even more tragic than a quick death, because 11 would be conscious, aware, stuck there potentially forever. In this version, Mike and the others would have to live, knowing that 11 is still out there somewhere, suffering, lonely, but doing what she believes is necessary. They couldn't save her, because saving her would mean reopening the gates and dooming everyone. It's the kind of impossible situation that would torment them all. Mike in particular would probably spend years trying to find a way to bring her back, some loophole or solution that would let him rescue her without endangering the world. But eventually, he'd have to accept that she made her choice, and he has to respect it. There's also the possibility that the final battle requires multiple people working together, combining their abilities and strengths in ways they haven't before. Maybe Will's connection to Vecna allows him to distract or confuse the villain. Maybe Max, if she wakes up, can use her experience surviving Vecna's curse to provide insight into his weaknesses. Maybe even Kaylee returns, using her illusion powers to give the others an advantage. In this scenario, 11 is still crucial, still the most powerful piece on the board, but she's not alone. If the battle plays out this way, with everyone contributing, then 11's death would be even more meaningful. She wouldn't die because she was the only one who could save them. She'd die as part of a team effort, giving everything she had so that others could finish the job. That emphasizes the themes of friendship and teamwork that have always been at the heart of Stranger Things. No one person saves the day. They save each other. And sometimes, saving each other means one person makes a sacrifice so the others can live. the mechanics of closing the gates are still mysterious. We don't fully understand the connection between Eleven's powers and the Upside Down. We know she opened the first gate by making contact with the Demogorgon in the void. We know she closed a gate in Season 2 through sheer force of will and power, but permanently sealing all the gates, preventing any future breaches that might require something more than just raw power. It might require 11 to fundamentally alter or destroy her connection to the Upside Down. And if her powers and her life force are intertwined, if she can't separate them, then destroying one means destroying both. This brings up interesting questions about the nature of Eleven's abilities. Are her powers innate, something she was born with? Or are they a result of the experiments Brenner performed, a forced connection to something beyond normal reality? If it's the latter, if Eleven's powers are essentially a gateway to the Upside Down that was opened inside her brain, then closing all the gates might mean closing the one inside herself. And that could be fatal. Henry Creel, Vecna, serves as a dark mirror to 11 in many ways. He also has powers. He also was experimented on. He also opened gates and shaped the Upside Down. The difference is that Henry embraced the darkness, became one with the Upside Down, let it consume and transform him. 11 has always fought to remain human, to hold on to her connections, her emotions, her identity. If defeating Vecna requires 11 to in some way merge with or destroy the Upside Down itself, she might have to give up that humanity. She might have to become something else, something not quite 11 anymore. And that loss of self, even if her body survives, would still be a kind of death. Let's talk about the symbolic weight of 11's potential death, because this is where the storytelling gets really interesting. 11 has always been more than just a character. She's a symbol. She represents the outsider, the misunderstood, the person who's powerful but vulnerable, different but desperate to belong. Her journey has been about learning to be human, to connect, to love and be loved. If her story ends in death, what does that symbolize? On one level, it's a classic hero's journey. The hero receives a call to adventure, faces trials, grows and changes, and ultimately sacrifices themselves for the greater good. 11 fits this pattern perfectly. She was called to help when Will disappeared. She faced countless trials, from the Demogorgon to the Mind Flayer to Vecna. She grew from a scared child who could barely speak into a confident young woman who understands her worth. And if she dies, it would be the ultimate sacrifice, giving her life so that others can live free from the threat of the Upside Down. But there's another layer to it. 11's story could also be read as a tragedy about the cost of being special, of being different. From the moment she was born, 11 never got to be normal. She was experimented on, weaponized, treated as less than human. Even after she escaped the lab, even after she found people who loved her, she was still defined by her powers. She was still the one who had to fight, who had to save everyone, who carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. If she dies young, never getting to experience a normal life, never getting to grow old with Mike, never getting to just be Jane Hopper without the expectations and the danger, that's tragic in a different way. It's a commentary on how we treat people who are different, how we ask them to bear burdens that no one should have to bear. From a thematic standpoint, Eleven's death would also represent the end of childhood and innocence. Stranger Things has always been, in part, about kids being forced to grow up too fast, about innocence lost in the face of horror. The party started the series playing Dungeons and Dragons and riding bikes. By season 5, they're traumatized veterans of a supernatural war. Eleven's death would be the final blow to that innocence, the moment when the fantasy of adventure and heroism gives way to the reality of loss and consequence. There's also something to be said about breaking cycles. Eleven was created by Brenner's experiments. Her powers came from his cruelty. In a sense, everything that's happened, all the pain and death and destruction, can be traced back to those experiments and to the government's desire to weaponize children. If Eleven dies destroying the Upside Down and ending the threat once and for all, she's also ending the cycle. No more children will be experimented on. No more gates will be opened. The damage can finally begin to heal. Her death would be the price of that healing, and it would ensure that future generations don't have to face what she faced. But let's also consider the counter-argument, the reasons why Eleven might not die, because for all the evidence supporting this theory, there are also good reasons to think the Duffer Brothers will choose a different path. First, there's the issue of predictability. As we've discussed, Eleven dying has become the most popular fan theory. Everyone expects it. And the Duffer Brothers have a track record of subverting expectations. They know what fans are predicting, and they might deliberately choose a different ending just to surprise us. Maybe Eleven survives, but loses her powers forever, living the normal life she's always wanted, but at the cost of the abilities that defined her. Maybe she survives, but someone else dies in her place. Maybe the ending is something none of us have predicted, some twist that recontextualizes everything we think we know. Second, there's the emotional argument. The Duffer Brothers have said they struggle with killing main characters because it makes the show too dark and depressing. They want the ending to feel like a victory, not just a tragedy. If Eleven dies, even if it's heroic and meaningful, that casts a shadow over everything. It makes the ending about loss rather than triumph. The Duffers might decide that's too heavy, that after 5 seasons of building these characters and relationships, they want to give fans an ending that's more hopeful. There's also the practical consideration that Millie Bobby Brown is the face of Stranger Things. She's the breakout star, the one who's been on the most magazine covers and in the most interviews. Killing off the most recognizable character in the final season is a risky move. It might alienate some fans, might leave people feeling unsatisfied. The Duffers might decide it's better to give Eleven a happy ending, to let her ride off into the sunset with Mike and Hopper and Joyce, living the family life she's always wanted. And then there's the possibility that the show takes a more creative approach. Maybe Eleven does die, but only temporarily. Maybe she's brought back somehow, through some mechanism we don't yet understand. Maybe her consciousness survives, even if her body doesn't, allowing her to still be present in some form. Maybe time travel or alternate dimensions play a role, allowing a version of Eleven to survive, even if the one we've been following dies. Stranger Things has always had fantastical elements, and the Duffers could use those elements to have their cake and eat it too, giving us the emotional weight of Eleven's sacrifice without the permanence of her death. Let's explore what the actual ending might look like if 11 does die. How would the show structure it? What would those final moments be? Imagine this. The final battle has been raging. Hawkins is in chaos, the Upside Down fully merged with our reality, monsters everywhere, the military overwhelmed. Vecna is at full power, more terrifying than ever, and it seems like all is lost. 11 and the others are exhausted, wounded, running on fumes, and then 11 has a realization. She understands what needs to be done. She looks at Mike, at Hopper, at her friends, and she knows this is goodbye. Maybe Mike tries to stop her. Maybe he grabs her hand and begs her not to do it, tells her there has to be another way. And maybe 11 smiles, touches his face, and tells him she loves him. She tells him she's not scared. She tells him this is what she was meant to do, that her entire life has been leading to this moment. And then she walks toward Vecna, toward the gates, glowing with power. The battle that follows would be epic. 11 unleashing everything she has, every ounce of power, every bit of strength. The others fighting alongside her, Will using his connection to Vecna, Max waking up at the crucial moment, Steve and Nancy and Jonathan and Robin all doing their part. And in the climax, 11 delivers the final blow. She tears Vecna apart, not just killing him, but destroying him utterly, erasing him from existence. And as she does, she reaches into the fabric of reality and tears the Upside Down away from our world, sealing the gates, healing the rifts. But the effort is too much. As the gates close, as the Upside Down fades, 11 collapses. Mike runs to her, catches her before she hits the ground. Hopper is there too, and Joyce and the others. They gather around as 11's eyes flutter, as blood trickles from her nose one last time. Maybe she whispers something. Maybe she just smiles, and then she's gone. The camera would linger on their faces. Mike's shock and denial, Hopper's quiet devastation, Joyce holding them both. The others standing in stunned silence as the reality sinks in. They won. They saved everyone. But the cost was 11, and nothing will ever be the same. From there, the show would likely jump forward in time, maybe a few months, maybe a year. We'd see Hawkins healing, rebuilding. The Upside Down is gone, truly gone. People are moving back. Life is returning to normal. But there's a memorial, a stone with 11's name, Jane Hopper, beloved daughter and friend, hero of Hawkins. We'd see Mike visiting that memorial. Maybe he leaves flowers. Maybe he talks to her, tells her about his day, tells her he misses her. We'd see Hopper with his arm around Joyce, both of them looking at that stone, remembering. We'd see the party together, older, changed, but still friends. They'd probably have some kind of tradition, meeting on the anniversary of 11's death to honor her memory. The final scene might show them playing Dungeons and Dragons again, but the game is different now. It's not just fun and imagination. It's a way to process what they've been through, to remember the battles they fought and the friend they lost. And as they play, as they laugh and argue and roll dice, there's a sense that 11 is still with them in spirit, that her sacrifice gave them this chance to live and grow and be okay. Alternatively, the final scene could be more intimate. Maybe it's just Mike alone in his room, holding something of 11's. Maybe her butterfly hair clip or a photo. And he's crying, but there's also a sense of peace. He's learning to live with the loss. He's honoring her by living well, by being the person she believed he could be. The show would end on his face, on that mixture of grief and gratitude, and the screen would fade to black. Either way, the ending would be designed to make us cry. It would be designed to hurt in a good way, to remind us that love and loss are intertwined, that heroes make sacrifices, and that the people we love never truly leave us as long as we remember them. Let's talk about how other characters would step up in Eleven's absence, because one of the fascinating aspects of this scenario is imagining how the dynamics shift when the most powerful person is gone. Will Byers would probably become even more crucial. His connection to Vecna and the Upside Down has been established since Season 1. If Eleven can't be there to fight, Will might have to tap into that connection in new ways. Maybe he learns to control it rather than being controlled by it. Maybe he becomes a kind of psychic warrior himself, using his sensitivity to the Upside Down as a weapon rather than a vulnerability. Noah Schnapp has said that Will's story comes full circle in Season 5, which suggests he'll play a major role. If Eleven dies, Will might be the one who carries on her legacy, who becomes the primary defense against any lingering threats. Max's potential recovery could also be significant. If she wakes from her coma, she'd be one of the few people who survived Vecna's curse. That experience would give her unique insight into how Vecna works, what his weaknesses are. Max could become the strategic mind of the group, the one who figures out how to hurt Vecna in ways that don't require immense psychic power. Her trauma would be transformed into strength, and she'd honor Eleven's sacrifice by making sure it wasn't in vain. Steve has always been the fighter, the one who charges in with a nail bat or Molotov cocktails. Without Eleven's powers to rely on, the group would need Steve's bravery and physical strength even more. Steve might take on an even more protective role, becoming the person who literally puts his body between the monsters and the others. There's something fitting about Steve, who started as a vain jock, ending the series as the self-sacrificing hero. If anyone else dies in the final battle, it might be Steve, going out in a blaze of glory to honor Eleven's sacrifice. Nancy's investigative skills and her sharpshooting would also become critical. Nancy has evolved into a warrior in her own right, someone who's faced down Demogorgons and Vecna without flinching. If Eleven dies, Nancy would probably step into a leadership role, coordinating the others, coming up with plans, making the hard calls. Nancy's always been driven by a need to expose the truth and fight injustice. Eleven's death would fuel that drive, make her even more determined to finish what Eleven started. Dustin's scientific mind and his ability to communicate with others would be invaluable. Dustin is the one who figures out how things work, who builds gadgets, who translates Russian. If the final battle requires technical solutions alongside brute force, Dustin would be at the center of it, and emotionally, Dustin would probably be the one trying to keep morale up, reminding everyone of why they're fighting and what Eleven would want them to do. Lucas and Erica Sinclair would bring their own strengths. Lucas is loyal and brave, always willing to put himself on the line. Erica is brilliant and fearless, with a strategic mind that rivals anyone's. Together, they'd represent the next generation, the proof that Hawkins will be okay even after Eleven is gone. Their contributions to the final battle would show that heroes come in all forms, that you don't need superpowers to make a difference. Jonathan, Robin, Argyle, Murray, Joyce, and Hopper would all play their parts as well. Jonathan, with his protective instincts and his willingness to sacrifice for his family. Robin, with her linguistic skills and her emotional intelligence. Argyle, with his unexpected moments of clarity and wisdom. Murray, with his conspiracy theories that turn out to be right. Joyce, with her maternal fierceness and her refusal to give up. Hopper, with his law enforcement training and his bone-deep need to protect the people he loves. The point is, without 11, everyone else would have to step up. They'd have to become more than they thought they could be. And that's a powerful message. It says that no one person can or should carry the weight of the world alone. It says that communities are stronger than individuals, that working together is how you survive the impossible. There's also the long-term impact to consider. How would 11's death shape Hawkins in the years and decades that follow? Would she become a legend, a story that parents tell their children? Would there be a holiday in her honor, a day where the town comes together to remember her sacrifice? Would her grave become a place of pilgrimage where people come to pay their respects and leave tokens of gratitude? Mike, assuming he survives, would probably dedicate his life to honoring 11's memory. Maybe he becomes a writer, telling stories that feature heroic girls with supernatural powers. Maybe he goes into public service, working to make sure no other children are experimented on like 11 was. Maybe he simply lives a good life, raising a family, being kind to others, trying to embody the values that 11 represented. Whatever path he chooses, 11 would be at the center of it, the guiding star that shapes every decision. Hopper would carry the weight of losing 2 daughters for the rest of his life. He might throw himself into his work as police chief, making Hawkins as safe as possible to honor both Sarah and 11. Or he might step back, realizing that life is precious and short, and focus on building a life with Joyce and Will and Jonathan. Either way, 11 would never be far from his thoughts. He'd visit her grave regularly, talk to her, tell her about his day, ask her advice even though she can't answer. That's how grief works. The dead stay with us, shaping us, guiding us, even in their absence. The town of Hawkins itself would be forever marked by what happened, even if most people never learn the full truth about the Upside Down and 11's role in stopping it. The survivors would know, and they'd make sure the next generation knows too. 11's story would become part of Hawkins' oral history, passed down like folklore, ensuring that she's never forgotten. Let's also address the meta-narrative around Millie Bobby Brown and what 11's death would mean for her career and legacy. Millie was 12 when Stranger Things premiered. She's now in her early 20s, married, recently became a mother through adoption. She's built an entire life and career around being 11, and now she's ready to move on. Killing off 11 gives Millie the clean break she needs. It ensures she'll never be obligated to return, never have to field questions about potential spin-offs or reunion specials. It lets her close the door definitively on this chapter of her life. But it also cements 11 as iconic, characters who die heroically, who sacrifice themselves for the greater good. Those characters become immortal in a way that characters who just ride off into the sunset don't. Think of Tony Stark in the MCU. Think of Han Solo in Star Wars. These characters died, and their deaths elevated them to legendary status. 11 dying in Season 5 would have the same effect. She'd be remembered not just as the star of a popular Netflix show, but as one of the great heroes of television, right up there with Buffy and Katniss and other young women who saved the world at great personal cost. For Millie personally, that kind of legacy is both a blessing and a burden. It's a blessing because 11 will always be there, a part of her career that she can be proud of. No matter what else she does, no matter how many other roles she plays, 11 will be the one that defines her. But it's also a burden because she'll always be compared to 11, always asked about Stranger Things, always expected to be that character in some way. Killing 11 off gives Millie the freedom to truly move on, to play other roles without the expectation that she might return to 11 someday. The Duffer Brothers would also benefit from a definitive ending. If 11 survives, there's always the possibility of bringing her back for something in the future, a spin-off, a TV movie, a cameo in another Stranger Things project. But if 11 dies, that door is closed. The Duffers can move on to other projects, knowing they told the complete story, that there's nothing left unsaid. That kind of closure is rare in television, especially in the era of endless reboots and revivals. Ending with 11's death would be a bold choice, a statement that Stranger Things is complete and doesn't need to be milked for more content. From a business perspective, it's worth considering how Netflix might feel about this ending. 11 is the face of Stranger Things, the character who drives merchandise sales and audience engagement. Killing her off is risky. It might upset fans, it might lead to backlash, but it would also generate massive conversation and emotional engagement. People would talk about the ending for years. They'd debate whether it was the right choice. They'd cry over it, write about it, create fan art and fan fiction exploring what comes after. That kind of cultural impact, that kind of lasting resonance, is valuable in its own way. Netflix has already committed to ending Stranger Things with Season 5. They're not going to drag it out indefinitely. So the question isn't whether the show should end, but how it should end. In an ending where 11 sacrifices herself, where the hero dies saving everyone, that's memorable. That's the kind of ending people don't forget. It's risky, absolutely, but great art always involves risk. Now let's talk about some of the alternative death scenarios that have been theorized, because there are multiple ways 11's story could end tragically. One theory suggests 11 might not die in the traditional sense, but could be absorbed into the Upside Down, becoming part of its structure or its energy. In this scenario, 11 would cease to exist as an individual, but would live on as a kind of consciousness that permeates that dimension. She'd be everywhere and nowhere, aware but unable to interact, powerful but unable to act. This is arguably more horrifying than death, because 11 would retain some level of awareness, trapped for eternity in that dark place. For her loved ones, it would be like she died, but there'd always be the question of whether some part of her is still out there, suffering. Another possibility is that 11 trades places with Vecna somehow. Maybe to defeat him, she has to take his place as the ruler or guardian of the Upside Down. She'd be trapped there, forced to maintain the barrier between dimensions for the rest of time. This is the Prometheus scenario, where the hero is condemned to eternal punishment for the crime of saving humanity. It's bleak, but it fits with the show's themes about the cost of power and the burden of being special. There's also the theory that Eleven's death might not happen in the final battle, but in the aftermath. Maybe she survives the fight with Vecna, survives closing the gates, but her body has been pushed too far. She has days or weeks before her organs fail, before the cumulative damage from years of using her powers catches up with her. This would give her time to say proper goodbyes, to have final conversations with each person she loves. It would be a slow, tragic ending rather than a quick, heroic sacrifice. In some ways, that's even more painful because everyone knows it's coming but can't stop it. They'd have to watch her fade, have to sit with the anticipation of loss. Alternatively, maybe Eleven loses her physical form, but her consciousness survives in the void, that black psychic space where she connects with others. She'd be able to communicate with Will or Max, people who have connections to the upside down or psychic sensitivity. But she couldn't touch anyone, couldn't be present in the physical world. She'd be a ghost, essentially, trapped between life and death. This would be bittersweet, because she wouldn't be gone completely, but she'd be fundamentally changed, unable to have the normal life she wanted. Some fans have even theorized that multiple main characters might die in Season 5, with Eleven being just one of several losses. Maybe Eleven and Hopper both die, a father and daughter sacrifice. Maybe Eleven and Steve both go out as heroes. Maybe Eleven, Max, and one of the boys all fall in the final battle. The Duffers have said that Season 5 will be the darkest season, and they've compared it to Return of the King, which featured multiple significant deaths. If they're planning a bloodbath, Eleven might die alongside others, and the ending would be about the surviving characters learning to live with massive loss. There's also the question of timing. Does Eleven die in Episode 7, Episode 8, somewhere in the middle? The finale is reportedly over 2 hours long, which gives a lot of room for aftermath and processing. If Eleven dies, there'd presumably be significant time devoted to the immediate reaction, to characters grieving, to the reality of the loss sinking in. The Duffers know that an emotional death requires proper handling. They can't just kill Eleven off and immediately cut to a time jump. They'd need to show the pain, the shock, the desperate attempts to bring her back or save her, and the eventual acceptance that she's gone. Some fans hope for a fake-out death, followed by a resurrection, similar to Hopper's arc. Maybe Eleven appears to die, but is actually transported somewhere else, trapped in another dimension or timeline. And then, in the finale, there's a last-minute rescue or return. This would give the emotional impact of her death without the permanence, providing that crowd-pleasing moment where she comes back and everyone's relieved. It's the safe choice, the one that satisfies everyone, but it's also potentially cheap, undercutting the sacrifice and making death feel reversible. The Duffer Brothers have to balance multiple considerations. They want an ending that's emotionally satisfying, that honors the characters and the journey. They want surprise and impact. They want to avoid being too dark or too depressing while still acknowledging the reality of war and sacrifice. It's a difficult needle to thread, and there's no perfect answer. Whatever they choose, some fans will love it and others will hate it. That's the nature of endings, especially for a show as beloved as Stranger Things. Let's shift focus and talk about how Eleven's potential death fits into the larger themes of Stranger Things. The show has always been about more than just monsters and psychic powers. It's about growing up, about loss of innocence, about the way childhood gives way to adolescence and then adulthood. It's about the gap between the fantasy of adventure and the reality of consequence. In Season 1, the kids are playing Dungeons and Dragons and imagining themselves as heroes. Then Will disappears, and they're thrust into a real adventure with actual monsters. But at that point, it still feels somewhat like a game. They have Eleven, who has superpowers. They have adults like Hopper and Joyce, who ultimately handle the most dangerous parts. The kids are participants, but they're protected. By Season 5, that protection is gone. They've seen people die. They've been injured, traumatized, changed. The fantasy has been stripped away, and what's left is the harsh reality that heroism is costly and dangerous. If Eleven dies, it's the final shattering of that childhood innocence. It's the moment when the characters have to accept that this isn't a game or an adventure story. It's real life. And in real life, sometimes heroes don't make it home. There's also a theme throughout Stranger Things about the sins of the past and how they affect the present. The experiments at Hawkins' lab, the government's willingness to weaponize children, Brenner's cruelty, these things created Eleven and Henry Creel. They opened the door to the upside down. The children of Hawkins are paying the price for decisions made by adults before they were born. If Eleven dies, she's essentially the final victim of those experiments. Her death is the ultimate consequence of Brenner's actions, the last ripple of harm spreading out from that original sin. But her death would also be redemptive. Eleven isn't just a victim. She's a hero who chooses to use the powers forced upon her for good, who reclaims her agency and her humanity. Her sacrifice would redeem the pain of her childhood, would transform her from a weapon into a savior. It's a heavy burden for a young woman to carry, and it's not entirely fair that she has to be the one to fix what others broke. But that's often how it works in reality. The next generation inherits the problems of the previous one and has to find a way to solve them. Family is another major theme, both biological and found. Eleven's family is complicated. Her biological mother was reduced to a vegetative state. Her biological father is Henry Creel, Vecna, the ultimate evil. But she found family with Hopper, with Joyce, with the boys, with Max. Her found family loves her unconditionally, and she loves them. If she dies, it would demonstrate the power of that found family, the way they shaped her into someone capable of selflessness and sacrifice. Without them, Eleven might have become like Henry, twisted by bitterness and isolation. But because Mike and Hopper and the others loved her, she became a hero. Her death would honor that love, would be a testament to how much they changed her life. There's also a feminist angle to consider. Eleven is a powerful young woman who refuses to be controlled or defined by men. Brenner tried to use her as a weapon. The lab tried to study and contain her, but Eleven escaped and chose her own path, fell in love on her own terms. She's not saved by Mike. She does the saving. She's not dependent on Hopper. She chooses to be his daughter. Her power comes from within, from her own strength and determination. If she dies, it's her choice, her decision. No one forces her into sacrifice. She looks at the situation, weighs the options, and chooses to give her life for others. That agency is crucial. It makes her death meaningful rather than tragic in a helpless way. But we should also acknowledge the criticism this ending would face. Some fans would argue that killing off 11 is just another example of Hollywood sacrificing strong female characters for emotional impact. They'd point out that male heroes often get to survive and retire, while female heroes are disproportionately killed off. That's a fair criticism. There is a pattern in media of women dying for the development of male characters, of their deaths being used to motivate men to action. The Duffer Brothers would need to be careful to avoid that trap. 11's death can't be about Mike's pain or Hopper's loss. It has to be about 11, her choice, her sacrifice, her victory. The story needs to center her even in her death. The aftermath should focus on honoring her legacy, not just on the men grieving for her. If done right, 11's death would be empowering, a statement that she chose to save the world on her terms. If done wrong, it's just another dead girl used for emotional manipulation. Let's talk about what the show would need to include to make 11's death truly meaningful and not just shock value. First, there needs to be setup. The audience needs to see 11 struggling with the decision, weighing whether there's another way, coming to the conclusion that this is what she has to do. That internal journey is crucial. Without it, her death feels arbitrary, like the writers needed someone to die, so they picked the most impactful character. Second, there needs to be time for goodbyes. 11 should get to have a final moment with each person who matters to her. With Mike, telling him she loves him and that he helped her learn what love means. With Hopper, thanking him for being her dad and giving her a real family. With Max, expressing gratitude for their friendship. With Will, acknowledging their shared connection to the Upside Down. These moments don't need to be long or elaborate, but they need to exist. They give the audience closure and let 11's relationships shine one final time. Third, the death itself needs to be heroic and clear. We need to see 11 choosing to sacrifice herself, see her using her powers at full strength, see her accomplishing something that no one else could do. The visual should be stunning and memorable. Maybe she's glowing with power, floating in the air, every ounce of her being focused on this one task. Maybe there's a moment where she smiles, at peace with her choice, before she lets go. The image of her death needs to be iconic, something that sums up everything she is and everything she's become. Fourth, the immediate aftermath needs to be honest about grief. We need to see Mike breaking down, Hopper crying, the others in shock. Grief isn't pretty or comfortable. It's messy and raw and painful. The show would need to depict that honestly, not rushing through it or glossing over the emotional impact. Characters should be allowed to fall apart, to be angry, to question why it had to be 11. That's real, that's human, and it makes the eventual acceptance and healing more meaningful. Finally, the ending needs to show how life goes on and how 11's sacrifice mattered. The time jump epilogue should depict Hawkins thriving, safe, free from the Upside Down. We should see the characters building lives worth living, honoring 11 by making the most of the chance she gave them. There should be evidence that she's remembered, that her story is told, that she lives on in the hearts and actions of the people who loved her. That's how you make a death meaningful, by showing that it wasn't in vain, that it led to something better. As we approach the end of this exploration, I want to address the elephant in the room. Do I personally think Eleven will die in season 5? Honestly, I'm torn. The evidence is compelling. The narrative logic is sound. The emotional impact would be massive. But I also think the Duffer Brothers might surprise us with something we haven't predicted. They're smart writers who understand their audience, and they know how devastating Eleven's death would be. They might decide that's too dark, that after everything these characters and this audience have been through, we deserve an ending that's more hopeful. My best guess is that season 5 will play with the idea of Eleven dying, will bring us to the brink of that loss, but will ultimately pull back. Maybe she nearly dies, but Mike or Hopper or someone else finds a way to save her at the last second. Maybe she loses her powers but survives, getting to live the normal life she's always wanted. Maybe there's some clever solution that allows the gates to be closed without requiring Eleven's death. But I could absolutely be wrong. The Duffers might go for the tragic ending, might decide that Eleven's death is the only way to properly conclude her story. And if they do, if season 5 ends with Eleven gone and the others grieving, I'll be devastated. I'll cry. I'll probably need to take a few days to process it. But I'll also respect the choice if it's done well, if it honors the character and the journey, if it means something beyond just shock and pain. What I hope, more than anything, is that whatever ending the Duffers choose, it feels true to Eleven. She's been through so much. She's grown so much. She deserves an ending that reflects her strength, her courage, her capacity for love. Whether she lives or dies, whether she gets her happy ending or makes the ultimate sacrifice, it needs to be her story, her choice, her victory. That's what matters most. And for us as viewers, whether Eleven survives or not, we'll always have the journey. We'll always have the memory of a scared little girl in a hospital gown who learned to be brave, who found a family, who saved the world again and again. We'll always have Friends Don't Lie, and frozen waffles, and Mike and Eleven's first kiss. We'll always have Hopper teaching her about compromise, and Joyce welcoming her into their family. We'll always have the moment she closed the gate in season 2, bleeding and screaming and refusing to give up. Those moments are ours forever, regardless of how the story ends. Stranger Things has been a cultural phenomenon, a show that captured lightning in a bottle and created something truly special. It reminded us of what it felt like to be kids, having adventures, facing fears, relying on friends. It gave us characters we love and a world we want to return to again and again. Whatever happens in season 5, whatever ending the Duffers have planned, Stranger Things will remain a defining show of this era of television. And Eleven, whether she lives or dies in the final season, will remain one of the great characters of modern television. She's brave and vulnerable, powerful and fragile, fierce and gentle. She's everything a hero should be. Millie Bobby Brown brought her to life with such skill and heart, creating a character that resonates with millions of people around the world. We've watched Eleven grow from a child to a young woman, and it's been a privilege to be on that journey with her. So as we wait for season 5 to arrive, as we count down the days until we finally learn how this story ends, let's appreciate what we have. Let's rewatch our favorite moments. Let's discuss our theories and hopes and fears. Let's be grateful that we got to experience this show, these characters, this world, and when the final episode airs, when we see how it all concludes, we'll face it together as a community of fans who've been on this wild ride from the beginning. If Eleven dies, we'll mourn her. We'll cry for her and for Mike and for Hopper and for all the others who loved her. We'll feel the weight of that loss because she meant something to us, because her story touched our hearts. And then, gradually, we'll do what the characters on the show will have to do. We'll learn to live with the loss. We'll honor her memory by carrying forward the lessons she taught us about courage and sacrifice and love. We'll remember that friends don't lie, that egos are best with lots of syrup, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose to protect the people you love, no matter the cost. But if Eleven survives, if she gets her happy ending with Mike and Hopper and the family she built, we'll celebrate. We'll be relieved and grateful and probably still crying because it'll be the end either way. We'll watch her ride off into that sunset, free from the burden of being a hero, finally able to be just Jane, and we'll smile through our tears knowing she earned that peace. Either way, Stranger Things Season 5 is going to wreck us emotionally. It's going to be beautiful and terrifying and heartbreaking and triumphant all at once. The Duffer Brothers have been building to this moment for years, crafting an ending they believe will satisfy and surprise us. Whether they succeed, we'll have to wait and see, but I trust them. I trust that they love these characters as much as we do, and that they'll give us an ending worthy of the journey. So here we are at the end of tonight's exploration, sitting in the dark together, contemplating loss and sacrifice and what it means to be a hero. If you made it this far, thank you for joining me on this emotional journey. Thank you for thinking through this possibility with me, for considering what it would mean if Eleven doesn't survive Season 5. I know it's heavy. I know it hurts to even think about. But sometimes exploring the painful possibilities helps us appreciate what we have and prepares us for whatever comes. Before I let you drift off to sleep, please do me a favor and hit that like button if you enjoyed this deep dive. Subscribe to the channel if you want more Stranger Things content and videos about other shows and movies. Your support genuinely means the world and helps me keep creating these long-form explorations for you to fall asleep to or just to think about during your day. In the future, I'll be covering more Stranger Things topics, from character analyses to theory discussions to episode breakdowns once Season 5 actually drops. There's so much more to talk about, from the nature of the Upside Down to Will's connection to Vecna to whether Max will ever truly recover. This show has given us so much to discuss and theorize about, and I'm excited to keep exploring it with you. For now, though, rest easy. Let these thoughts about Eleven and sacrifice and heroism wash over you as you drift toward sleep. Think about the people in your own life who you'd protect at any cost, the loves and friendships that make life worth living. Think about the ways we're all heroes in our own small ways, making sacrifices and difficult choices, trying to do right by the people we care about. And remember, whether Eleven lives or dies, whether Season 5 breaks our hearts or gives us the happy ending we hope for, will always have Hawkins, will always have the Upside Down, will always have the story of kids who faced monsters and grew up too fast and saved the world anyway. That's the magic of Stranger Things, and no ending can take that away from us. Until next time, my dear adventurers, stay safe, stay curious, and sweet dreams. May your sleep be peaceful and your dreams be full of waffles and telepathy and friendship that conquers all. Good night.